you're ready, let me know and we will start. Fine? Okay. So then we start. Okay, so hello everyone. Very happy to have this wonderful night organized at Gamma on screen, and I'm very happy to host here our guests, Francesca Franco. She's the author of Generative Systems Art, the research and book that was recently published in 2017 by the Routledge Publishing. And this book is dedicated to the work of Ernest Edmonds, the media artist that is present with us also in this Zoom meeting tonight. And we will have both artist talks of Francesca and of Ernest, and we will have some videos to see, but also we're going to have some discussion about this research that was conducted by Francesca, and some questions will be following the artist talk of Ernest about his own artist practice. And if you have some questions, just follow the comments in the screen, and we will be able to follow up the questions after we finish with our talks, and we'll answer them. I just wanted to give a very short intro to Francesca and Ernest. Francesca, she is an art historian, and just like me, she's also focusing her research on the media art histories, what is very exciting. And for me, I was following your work, Francesca, and I enjoyed reading of this book a lot, because previously, of course, I was following work of Ernest, and work of you two is just united in one kind of result, and it's very interesting for me. And Francesca right now, she is based in the UK also, just like Ernest, and she's a research fellow at the University of Exeter. And Ernest is also teaching at the moment, right? And he is also having his work not only exhibited still and performed, but some of the work is represented by the Victoria and Albert Museum as a part of the National Archive of Computer-Based Art and Design. And here I will stop, not going further, because then Francesca will continue with the actual presentation of the research. And thank you very much for this.
Well, thank you very much, Natalia, for having me here, and hi everyone. I'm really happy to present my book here for many reasons. One is that, I don't know you, but this quarantine is driving me crazy. So it's great to have a platform like this to interact with each other, and to have an opportunity to keep our mind focused on something. And another reason that I'm really happy to present my book here is that it recently became available as a paperback, which is absolutely great. So this invitation came at a very good time. As you said, I'm an art historian and a curator, and my research has been focused on the history of early computer art since I moved to the UK for my studies almost 20 years ago. So I was then lucky enough to join the Victoria and Albert Museum in London and work on their then newly acquired collection of computer art. So having the opportunity to research this collection from the very beginning, allowed me to expand my knowledge and passion for this subject. My approach has always been that of a traditional art historian, looking for the original sources and trying to understand the context in which an artist or a movement formed or they worked with. So my book represents my contribution to the field of art history. And the main challenge I set myself was to integrate computational art into traditional art historiography. So as for the subject of the book that we have here in one of the screens, Ernest, I first met Ernest in 2009 while I was working at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And I was immediately fascinated by his work, and we started working on a joint article that we then presented at one of the Media Art Histories conferences in Melbourne that year. And at that time I realized that basically not much research had been done, in particular from an art historical perspective, on the pioneers of computational art. So I decided to concentrate my efforts in studying their work and in giving them a voice, because through their work I felt that I could trace the history, or one history in particular, of media art. And I was particularly interested in understanding the intersections between the recent developments in computational art, of which Ernest is a pioneer, and past traditions such as constructivism and systems art. But what I found out during this process was an even more exciting and rich history that includes an artist's personal evolution from figurative art to color abstraction and computer-based experimentation. And I realized how these inspirations have offered challenges that encourage the development of new technologies and that bring life to research in technology and new media art. So for about 4 years, I researched Ernest's artworks and the documentation material in his amazing studio in Derbyshire and in the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum. And I also recorded hours of interviews with him and the artists, curators, collaborators he's been working with over the years. So this book is a combination of these sources. So what I'd like to do today is to give you a brief overview of Edmonds' background, and then concentrate on a couple of works that he made between 1980 and 2014 that will hopefully help to understand one of the key developments of generative art from the very early stages up to the, and how its evolution basically happened up to the present time. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Ernest Edmonds and his work, he's an artist who has been active in the field of interactive and generative art since the late 60s. His background is in mathematics, philosophy, and logic. And as an artist, he has been influenced by various interests, such as concrete poetry, film, music, mathematical logic, and computing. His work is rooted in constructivism. Sorry, have I switched on into sharing?
Not yet, but it's good if you...
Okay, sorry. As an artist, he's been influenced by various interests, and his work is rooted in constructivism, I was saying. The aim of constructivism was to create objects with a new, revolutionary, and functional approach. So these influences inspired Edmonds to develop his own artistic language. And this language was, and still is, based on a dialogue between color, structure, time, and interaction. So now, wish me luck, because I've never shared my screen on Zoom live. So let's hope it works, because I have some pictures to show you. Let me see. Can you see the full screen?
Yes, it's all good. We can see your screen.
Well, this is the cover of the book. So from the early 60s, Edmonds began experimenting with structure in his work. And here are just a few examples. As you can see, his early watercolors, his drawings in China, black ink, concrete poetry, and paintings are mainly inspired by geometrical abstract shapes. And these works reference to the iconic color structures of Mondrian and the evolution of constructivism brought forward by American Charles Biederman. So after an initial phase based on those influences in the early 90s, Edmonds' work evolved towards a practice increasingly engaged with the notion of time. And this was made possible in part by the introduction and the availability of the personal computer. And this represents a key moment in his career when he realized that there was a way in which he could combine his research into structure and add time to it, making time-based art. And here are some examples that we will see later on in movement. Edmonds' insight was that logic programming, which is based on axioms and goal statements, could be applied in art to make generative work integrated with the notion of time. And as Edmonds explained in one of his essays, logic programming can be used as a method for handling structures in time by visually representing the internal search process within a computer. An important element of logic programming is that it includes backtracking, where when certain rules have been tried and fail to get to the goal, the computer goes back and looks for alternative ways of using the rules. So in his video constructs that you can see here, which were made in the early 1980s, this process of backtracking is used to generate an unfolding search. And the artwork, which is the image sequence, is a trace of this search. This was a very brief introduction to Edmonds' work. So what I'd like to do now is to go back to one of his early works, 19, that represents Edmonds' first use of a computer program in his art. 19 was shown for the first time in Leicester in 1970, and it's a large panel made of 20 squared reliefs attached to a white supporting structure and arranged in a grid. And each piece shows a number of abstract shapes and vibrant colors. While working on 19, on this panel, Edmonds, who at that time was a PhD student in logic at Nottingham University, he started to program the computer just out of curiosity And he found a use for programming in solving a logic problem, which was then published in an academic, scientific publication. So in arranging the 20 pieces into a grid, he couldn't find a satisfactory positioning for each piece. And on reflection, he realized that he could identify a set of rules that, if they were met, would solve his problem. So he started to think about introducing a number of organizing principles to the whole composition. And the second realization was that he could compose a computer program very similar to the one that he had written to solve that logic problem, that could search for the solution. And that helped complete 19. But as we will see, this use of the computer programming for 19 was much more significant and eventually transformed Ernest Edmonds' art. And in particular, it caused Edmonds to realize the significance of using more formal processes and procedures in art making, and raised the question in his mind of what the implications for art of computer programming might be. I have two other examples that I'd like to show you, just to see how his works work, or how the organizing principles work in his artworks. These two works, 51 and 52, are part of a series of acrylic paintings on canvas that he made in 1980 when exploring new ways of structuring and executing an artwork by using rules and organizing principles. 51 and 52 were structured in two concurrent respects. First, the organization of the structure and the colors. And second, the process of execution of the painting. As to the organizational aspect of the artwork, this had no implications on how it was done, whereas the process drove how the painting was made, in what order the paint was applied, and where. 51 and 52 are two separate squared canvases placed side by side and represent two variations of a theme or structure. Each one uses three basic colors called seeds colors. So let's pick, for example, the first variation, 51, which is the one on the left. The first rule specified by the artist is that the image be divided into 9 sections of equal area that define a 3 by 3 grid. And there should be 3 seeds colors in it. Each of those 3 colors should be allocated a square in the grid where none of them has to appear on the same row or column as another. So for ease of explanation, I made this table just to exemplify the grid. And the numbers in it refer to a specific square in the grid. So the 3 seeds color in 51 therefore appear in square number 4, number 2, and number 9. The second organizing rule states that when any one of these colors appears in any particular row or column, then such color has to be in all of that row or column. So, for example, the color in number 9 has to appear in 7, 8, 6, and 3. And the color in 2 has to appear in 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8. And the color in 4 has to appear in 1, 7, 5, and 6. As to the process of the execution of the painting, this followed other sets of rules. The paint was applied with a spray gun, and for your amusement, I added a few pictures that I found in the archive that not only show you how he was applying the paint onto the canvas, but also how cool Ernest was in the late 70s, wearing his white Dr. Martens and really cool sunglasses. Edmonds decided to make the spraying process obvious, basically as one of the organizing rules implied the presence of 2 colors in one single square of the grid. So Ernest decided that when combining the 2 colors, they should be sprayed both without mixing them. So he decided to make the spraying process obvious, so the colors were intentionally sprayed lightly. And this meant that the direction of the spray was made visible. So he therefore chose 3 ways of spraying: bottom left to right top, horizontally, and top left, bottom right. So basically, these 3 directions formed, similarly to the 3 seeds colors that I mentioned before, 3 different generating squares following the same organizing rules set up for each seed color. And as a result, if square 8 was allocated horizontal sprays, then 7, 8, 9, 5, and 2 will have to use horizontal spray, and so on. So there are now 2 overlapping patterns: the pattern of colors and the pattern of spraying. And in this way, the artist has defined the structure of the organizational elements of the painting and the process of making it. And the second painting, 52, which is the square on the right, is a variation of the same theme, where the allocation of the colors and spraying directions are changed. For Edmonds, this process of creating an artwork derived from 2 important sources of inspiration. Firstly, as I mentioned before, was the process activated by 19, which represented to Edmonds the first critical point of change in his art. And secondly, was the work of Charles Biederman. And it was particularly the way Biederman understood art as the solution of a problem to be found in pure observation that connected with Edmonds' research and art practice. So these 2 experiences helped Edmonds crystallize the understanding that making the elements of the work simpler added power to his work. This is a more recent work titled 4 Shaped Forms Vanish, and this is a 4-piece digital print on aluminium based on a series of acrylic paintings on canvas called 4 Shaped Forms. And here is one example exhibited in Sheffield in 2012. These are strongly connected to Shaping Form, which is a series of time-based works Edmonds made from 2007, exploring the notion of interaction. This is Shaping Form, by the way. Interaction has been one of the focuses of Edmonds' investigations since the early 70s. It developed even further in recent years, as demonstrated by his Shaping Form series. Here, interaction is intended as an exploration of long-term influences rather than short-term reactions. Shaping forms that you can see here, this is one example. This is a series of generative and computational works displayed on a square monitor surrounded by a purpose-designed frame in plastic and wood. They are individual works where images are constantly generated by a computer program that decides which colors, patterns, and timing the work should display at any given moment. The movement in front of each work is detected by a camera and produces changes in the image, shape, and duration, so that the environment, the active spectator, and the work influence each other. And here are some sketches that I found in Ernest's archive when I was researching this work. So the 4 canvases making 4 shaped forms represent 4 variations of a theme directly connected to shaping forms. Sorry, I missed the last one. Let's see this one. So these are the 4 canvases. So basically, in 4 shaped forms, the structure of the elements within the picture, organized in a 4x4 square grid, looks similar to the way 51 and 52 were organized, the 1980s works. As a matter of fact, its structure is much more complex and less easily explained by geometry, as 4 shaped forms that we can see here are 4 moments selected out of a time-based sequence. And the way 4 shaped forms is structured is therefore more obscure, but nevertheless, it provided Edmonds with a procedure and a process for generating the images in a rigorous way, similar to the earlier experiences of 19 and 51 and 52. The colors and patterns show that they've been chosen, and for each canvas of this particular work, they are selected by the artist from stills of shaping forms. The colors are then manipulated and adjusted by eye onto the canvas, and the dialogue that this relationship creates between the time-based work and the painting is strong. In the time-based works, the viewer can only appreciate colors and patterns in one sequence with different lengths of time between them, which generates a kind of rhythm through time. And although this musical quality is lost in the paintings, by looking at the 4 variations of 4 shaped forms, the viewer is able to experience 4 different moments of a theme at the same time. So to conclude, I just wanted to explore a selection of works by Ernest that delineates one of the possible routes of this very complex field of generative art. The mathematical rules applied by Edmonds to create 51 and 52, and the software works that inspired 4 shaped forms have generated paintings that are in constant dialogue with their computational counterparts, which are 19 and shaping forms. 51 and 52 and 4 shaped forms demonstrate that rules and computation methods can be seen as inventive forces that delineate a new order in the creative process of an artist. And although the computer was not used directly to create those specific works, these could have not been created without the earlier computational works generated and programmed by Edmonds from the late 60s. So there is a dialogue between the painting works and the software pieces that I've discussed before, and they represent one of the developments of generative computational art that is in constant evolution. So I think this is all I wanted to show you for the moment. So I'm gonna stop here.
Thank you very much, Francesca. You can, yeah, you just stop sharing. So thank you a lot for this brief but beautiful and very detailed introduction overview to Ernest works. And I have to say that I was personally very glad to find out from your research also more information of the interrelation of Ernest work with constructivism, of course, and knowing that I was able to look differently also at his art. And the question I have to you that would let us understand maybe also more your academic interest to the generative and computational art is how did you start to relate yourself to the media art history as a discipline, and what is your vision on the current importance of this area of academic research?
Okay, so the first part of your question about how I got into media art history, right. I have a very traditional art historical background. So I was born and grew up and studied in Venice, and my undergraduate dissertation was on Renaissance portraiture in Venice around 1500. I was, at that time, I was fascinated by Aby Warburg and his Mnemosyne Atlas, and I co-founded an academic journal focused on Warburg's methodology, and I realized that the computer could be a useful tool to analyze Mnemosyne and its images. And it happened that, again, at the same time, I came across an MA in London, which was titled Computer Applications for the History of Art. So once I completed my degree in Venice, I just packed my stuff and I moved to the UK to do that MA, which then took me to my PhD on the history of media art and the Venice Biennale. So that was a very strange way to come to computer art, but to me it was absolutely a direct connection. And you asked me about my vision of
the importance of such research for the media art history.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about this, but I think one of the key aspects in this area of research, which is interdisciplinary at its core, is the necessity of a common language. So personally, I've always tried to force myself to find a language that would be understood both by the scientific and by the artistic community without losing the richness and depth of the concepts that I'd like to explore. And I also feel the necessity to document and give a voice to the artists that have pioneered this field for over 50 years, which is the reason why I've been traveling like mad, recording interviews with my heroes over the years. And this is also the reason why I find this subject extremely exciting and alive. So these are the two cores, I think, of my understanding of this field.
You mentioned also that you are involved in curation, so you have some projects ongoing probably in the field of curatorial practice. Could you maybe tell something about it?
Sure. I started curating exhibitions as a way to tell the stories that I was discovering with my research. So basically my curatorial practice rotates around my research. So I see it as a way to tell a story in a more visual way. My curatorial practice is also based directly on conversations with artists. So I absolutely love to develop the curatorial project by involving the artists from the very early stages of the process, and by commissioning new works to make the exhibition more personal. And I'm also very much inspired by architecture. So the venues that I choose for my shows are always interacting with the curatorial concept, and the works I select are basically in synergy with the space around them. So having said all of this, for my latest projects, I mean, for the past 2 years, I've been working on a large scale exhibition on the history of computer art to present as a collateral event, as they call it, at the next Venice Biennale, which, as you may have heard, has been postponed to 2022 because of the COVID-19 situation. So this large project has been just postponed 1 year. So that will be a 2022 Venice Biennale collateral event about new media art for me. And hopefully there will be a smaller, like a test drive exhibition next year in Paris. So I'm working on these two curatorial projects, and it's really exciting despite the craziness of these times.
That's great to hear. And about Britain and UK, do you have any ongoing curatorial practice there?
I tend to focus on my on my own town, like Venice, because my idea is to bring back home what I learned over these years spent in the UK. But I mean, there might be projects to develop here as well. At the moment, the project of the Biennale is so big and so challenging that I'm concentrating more on that side.
So then, good luck with this, because it's I can see and understand that it might be very demanding and have a great aim to bring more new media art to Venice Biennial. I guess that's a great step for the whole community, and the work that you do is very important. And I wanted to now move to Ernest, who is with us also, and ask you, Ernest, how did you experience this collaboration with Francesca, and what did it mean, or what does it mean for you as an artist to experience and see this ongoing research on your own art practice?
Thank you. Yes, well, it was quite an amazing experience, involving, of course, many conversations in many different places, and also the finding of my archives and stuff that was in my studio. And what Francesca did that was most amazing to me, never mind the book, was she made me realize things about what I've been doing over the last 50 or 60 years. And the most valuable part of that to me was understanding that there was a unity about it. when one works, you do something, and then the next year you think, oh, I've got another new idea, I'll do this, I'll forget whatever it was last year. And then 10 years later, you're onto something else, and it's all new, and what you did a long time ago is kind of like old hat. But in the conversations with Francesca and looking through the records of all that stuff, unfortunately, I kept quite a few records as I went along, I discovered that I was really pursuing a single line all the time. It looks different, it behaves differently, and so on, but my artistic vision hasn't actually changed in all that time. And I think that that's what Francesca showed me by having this collaboration with me, and that was the most valuable part of it.
Thank you. Will you share also with us the something you wanted to show?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it would be quite nice to talk a little bit about what I'm doing now. You'll find every artist is most interested in what they're doing now, if not what they're about to do tomorrow, which is even more interesting. But maybe I can say a few things about what I'm doing now briefly in relation to what I've done in the past. Francesca's covered a central part of what I did in the past. Her book is broader than she had time to talk about. So I'll mention a couple other things in the past briefly to help me explain what I'm doing now. And those other things are also covered in Francesca's work. And maybe I'll bring up a few images to show you to help me explain this. I think the first image I'm going to show you, you've seen before. It's this painting, well, it's relief, to be honest. I did in 68, 69, where I first used a computer program. As Francesca has already explained to you, that was really just by way of helping me work out what to do, and could then have been thrown away. In fact, the computer program could have been thrown away, although so happens I found it sitting in a box somewhere in a listing. And this taught me various things. And it, in a way, made me reflect about programming and software and computation and art. And this has been explained already. And of course, as you've seen, it led to all kinds of developments in my painting that still go on. And for example, here's the latest painting I've done, which is in that tradition. But it also had other things that came out of it. So I worked with the late Stroud Cornock, theoretically and practically, about trying to work out in the late 1960s what the implications of computers were. This was a long while before we had PCs and so on. So a lot of this work was quite theoretical rather than practical, although we did make some bits and pieces. And one of the things we worked on, as you've heard, is interaction, so making interactive art. And whilst working on interactive art, I came up with the notion of making what today we would call network art or net art. This was before the internet, so I actually built with a soldering iron and so on a small network through which people could communicate with one another, and showed this in 1971 in Leicester. And started another line of work. So I'm wanting to explain a couple of things that I'm doing now that come from this idea. That's the idea of communicating or interacting between one another, people interacting with one another through a system, and that interaction through the system being the art. In this decade and in the last, I've been working on something I've called Cities Tango, which is where we have, using the internet, part of an artwork in one city and another part in another. For example, this is a piece where I had a changing abstract work, like the shaping form work that Francesca has already described, but occasionally showing images of the other city. So this image was taken in Sydney, Australia, and the image you can see on the screen has actually been sent over from Belfast. And here's a little video taken in Belfast at the same time, where there's not a very good quality video, I'm afraid, but you get the rough idea that there's a abstract artwork through which images are being shown from a distant place. And the key point about this is there are cameras analysing the movement of people in front of the works in both cities. And so that each audience, there are two audience sets, if you like, are influencing what the other audience sees. So there's a sort of communication going on between those people, yeah, in an abstract kind of way. The shaping form works have become installation pieces sometime. This is a piece called Shaping Space, which is an installation in a room where the images are generative, they change all the time according to the kinds of rules that you've already heard about. And the cameras, which are sitting on the floor underneath these floating images, are detecting movement in the room, affecting how the screens behave, and also affecting how they develop, so that the idea is that a week later the images are different to they were last week or today because of the experiences that have been going on. And these have been developing as kind of contemplative works, really. What we found is people, in this particular case, where this image was taken, people sometimes came in and experienced the work, moved around, waved their arms to see what would happen. But other people went to the gallery staff and said, "Could I have a chair, please? I really want to just sit down and experience this over a relatively long period of time." And these works have been developing quite a long while, but something happened to me at the beginning of this year. I was in Australia, and if you can think, before the coronavirus crisis hit us, we had another crisis in Australia, which was fire. And what I realized was the colors of fire that I was seeing on the television every minute of the day, more or less, in Australia, were very close to the colors of my work. So one of the pieces that I'm working on now is a development from that purely abstract shaping space kind of work to a work that actually addresses the issue of fire and the experience of fire. So there's become a sort of meaningful element added to those works. And then there's another aspect. So I'm going to mention three things that I'm doing at the moment, which is, of course, everyone is concerned today with augmented reality as an extension of virtual reality. Something that I worked on a long time ago, technically, but never made artworks with back in the 80s because the technology wasn't sufficiently good to enable me to make something that I thought was satisfactory as an artwork. But today it is. So if you think of those pieces that I was talking about, which exist in different cities, well, they can exist in different headsets, and those headsets can be in different cities. And so these new works, of which this is when I showed a prototype, one of these in Sydney recently, where in this case, some of the work was going on in Sydney and some was going on in China. And through the image here, through the image being seen through the glasses here, would be an image that would include sometimes some parts of what was being seen in China. And we're working on this to make it work on phones. We have a prototype which is working on phones like this. I'm working with some collaborators, both people who've actually done PhDs with me in the past, where now the interactive, distributed, networked art work is something that can exist in many, many places and have many, many nodes, many people interacting together using their people's own devices. So now it's moving, if you like, out of the installation world, out of the gallery, and into wherever anyone happens to be, into the street even. So I think this is another development of my work, which is combining these various elements of my history. Now, beyond this, there's something else that I want to mention, and that is sound. I have worked over many years on audiovisual performances, where it isn't in my case where, for example, in this case you see a trumpet. The trumpet is not playing the music on the screen in some sense. The image on the screen is not a picture of the music being played, but there's a sort of duet going on between the image and the sound, forming a whole. And currently, the project I'm working on, an unfinished project, is for large installation spaces in domes. I'm working with an artist called Pip Greasley, excuse me, but that seemed to have lost that image for some reason. I don't know why. Okay. With an artist called Pip Greasley, and we're engulfing people in color and sound, where the color and the sound is shifting in ways that provide a completely enwrapping experience, audiovisual experience. We have shown an example of this, but I don't know where this is going. I think this is a very interesting part of my work because I haven't done it yet. This is the next step. But it all goes back to those beginnings and the things you heard about in the last hour or so. The structure of works, the way that systems can be used to help construct the work, and the importance of computer software and the whole notion of computation in realizing them. And for me, the way that all that has helped me engulf and understand color, space, time, and interaction. And I think if I stop there, I think I've said quite a lot. As I pointed out to you, much of that, apart from the things I haven't quite done or I've only just done, are in Francesca's book. And that book points to these things, I think, and people won't be surprised to see this new work as it comes out. And always the new work is the best.
Thank you, Ernest. So seeing such a broad range of application of technology in your art practice now, I became interested in your current understanding of interdisciplinarity, in the interdisciplinary nature of the current art practice that is widespread and maybe is very symbolical for our times. Did this understanding of interdisciplinarity and the synthesis of technology and art changed a lot for you conceptually from the beginning of your practice and up to now?
Very good question, thank you. Yes, it has changed a lot. I mean, to begin with, it was pragmatic. It was pragmatic in this sense that I was determined that I was an artist from when I was a schoolboy. But for various reasons, I made a decision not to try to go to art school. It didn't suit me at the time. And I ended up studying mathematics and philosophy and whatnot. And then I ended up with a job, and I moved into logic, and I ended up in a job as doing research, basically in logic and finding computers, and got a job as a lecturer, a junior lecturer in computing. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? You know, I'm really wanting to pursue my career as an artist. So I thought, well, the only thing to do is just to try to find out how computers could be useful for art. And so I did something multidisciplinary and across disciplines pragmatically in order to make my life more interesting than it otherwise was going to be. But that proved to be a very lucky step because, as you understand very well, and explain that in your question, it has become kind of central to much art practice today. So by chance, I stepped in the right direction. And in fact, with my colleagues, we have over the years in more than one university studied these interactive processes. And the whole set of projects we did back in the 90s, especially, and going forward, much of it led by Linda Candy, where we made studies of artists working in collaborative teams and trying to understand the pragmatics and the ways in which the work was influenced by these teams. And it turned out that collaboration and the formation of the teams was a central part of that research and a central part of what came out, different ways in which people worked together. Some artists like to be the boss and just tell everyone what to do. And some people are willing to actually collaborate and share the glory and share the creativity. And in fact, the latter ones seem to be the people who end up being most successful, I think. And it's very important today. And I don't think it's a matter of collaboration because, for example, programming is difficult and an artist wants to have a computer-based artwork and not bother with the programming. I think the artist needs to know the programming too. But I started that, in fact, that Big Relief 19, the one that I did in 1968-69, was itself a collaboration. Not to do with computers exactly. I did the computing part of it all myself. But my dad worked in an engineering company and two of the pieces in there were quite difficult metal pieces, and he helped me work out how they could be manufactured and had them made in his engineering company. And my friend, the late Stroud Cornock, I found them because I needed professional quality spraying done for the paint, and he was running the spray booth in the art school where I was working, and so he actually did the spraying for that. So it was a collaborative piece too, although I didn't think about it like that at the time, but in fact it was. And today, in fact, most art that I come across that's made in our domain is collaborative in some way or another, no matter how many skills the artist might have.
We have a couple of videos to watch and let our audience see. This will be the excerpt and a documentation of one of the performances, the audiovisual one that you, where you collaborated with Mark Fell, right?
That's right.
This one. And then there will be the documentation and the interview, also representing your work, and in total that will be something like 10 minutes screening, and we will have time also to see if the audience have any questions. I encourage people to ask them, and we are back in 10 minutes here to finalize this meeting and the discussion. We're back live, And we've got question from one of our colleagues watching us broadcasted live. And the question, I guess, is good for both of you, for Francesca and Ernest also. The question is, how do you see art integration in the everyday digital media landscape?
Shall I start?
Okay.
I don't know. It's a really good question. And again, you could say many, many things about this. As a media art historian and curator, I personally feel that it's amazing that we live at this moment. And I think it's amazing. I mean, we are both starting to have a history of this field because it's been over 50 years now since it started. So it has a history. But at the same time, we are able to connect and to talk to the very same artists that started experimenting with new technologies when they became available 50 years ago. So I think this is a unique time for this, to think about the history of this field and at the same time to go directly to the sources. For instance, all these pioneers of computer art that amazingly they started to experiment with this new media, but are also still working with the most recent technologies. So they keep evolving and they keep exploring new trajectories in the media art field. So personally, I'm really, really excited to live now. And it's fantastic that there's a past, a present, and the future all at the same time.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's probably worth remembering that technologically, the important thing perhaps has been the coming together of new computer technologies with new communications technologies. And that's why we have all the social media, for example, that drive many people's lives, for good or bad. But these, I think, are probably important in the future of art in this context. So much of what we are concerned with now is ambient. So ambient interaction. That's to say, not where someone goes into a gallery, goes into a room where it says on the door, go in here and you can interact with this artwork, or go into a space where they're given a headset and fitted with it and then interact. But where they just walk past something and perhaps notice that they're interacting with it or it's interacting with them, and perhaps not notice it. That means something in the street, in a cafe, in a bar, in the underground and on a bus, and so on. So we're increasingly seeing this, and the technology is making it easier. I showed pictures of augmented reality with people wearing these great big headsets. That's the Microsoft HoloLens. But very soon we are going to have more functional versions of what came out from Google, the Google Glass. I believe there's going to be an eyeglass from Apple, probably. People are talking about it. And there'll be other sort of things where you won't notice, you just wear them all the time, for example. And our streets are full of hoardings, which are more and more, almost 90% electronic displays, in fact. And how many cameras are there? How many cameras are there you never even notice? If you think of all the technology that's around, well, I think we're making art to use that technology. So we're going to see art which is ambient, in the street, in the cafes, and so on, that we interact with. And if you think of the communications aspect, and I talked about my own work in that area, of course, these things can all be on the internet. Smart cities in the plural, connected together. So the idea of connecting people together in the street in these ambient interactive experience. This is very real. I've actually done projects on this with architectural company in Adelaide in Australia, where we've shown that we can build such systems. And this notion of slow change is also part of this, so that you go to work the same way every day, maybe, and you go past these things, and slowly you find that it's behaving differently, it's looking differently to how it did last week and so on. So this notion that the interactive distributed artwork becomes part of our lives, I think could become very real. And I also showed how this can come onto the phones that we use, the other devices that we're going to use in the future, our watches, whatever, brooches, hair clips, glasses, whatever. So I think that there will be an integration here, and it's something that artists are beginning to grapple with, and will transform our notion of all of that, and transform our notion of the city, join spaces together in different ways. So space becomes different. All very exciting.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. And thank you for spending this hour and a little more together, and going briefly through such a long period of time, seeing art and technology development, and being digitally together here. So I thank you very much, both for your work, for your art, for your research. And I thank our audience also for being with us and spending this time together. I wish everyone good luck in the future endeavors in art and technology, and all the best then.
Thank you for inviting us and having us with you.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. That's been really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Good.